everybody. Thank you first, Ionic, for allowing me to present today. It's a pleasure getting to present with some of the other people today. Really an honor. So yeah, I want to speak a little bit, just, 2020 with it almost being behind us, some of the trends that we've seen at Modus Create and just in the industry, and some of the predictions we have going into 21 on how this is going to impact enterprises and, anything from startups through enterprises within the software world. Alrighty. So when buzzwords got real, like I said, 2020 has forced organizations to transform faster than ever before. Everything kind of came out of nowhere to where if we wanted to be relevant, we had to make change. So as I was introduced as, I'm Sarah McCasland. I work for Modus Create. We do digital transformation, web and mobile app development, and we are an Ionic partner. I've been in the software industry for about 15 years now. Background was more on the delivery side, product and project management, and very passionate about agile processes. And so I've used the last 6 years to take everything I learned on the delivery side of software and apply it to the operational side of running a company that's focused on building software solutions. Outside of this, I've worked remotely for about 6 years now, so I'm very passionate about remote work and helping our clients and other organizations understand how to become remote first. In addition to that, I live in Missouri, and I'm currently pursuing my MBA at WashU. So if there's any other WashU people, I'd love to get to know you more. And then in my free time, I raise a few kids and I like to travel. So that's a little bit about me, very open. And I do like to chat. I am really nervous though. So like I said, I work at Modus Create, and we've been very lucky at Modus. 2020 has seen a lot of positive growth for us. As you can see, some of our clients are listed here. We work with a lot of large brands across multiple industries within e-com, hospitality, private and public sectors, and just a multitude of them. We also have a lot of awesome partnerships that we do and that we support. One being Ionic, and some of the other ones that really help solidify full product lifecycle from ideation through implementation, and on the cloud side, including Atlassian, we're a strong partner there, AWS, GitHub, AHA, and a few others that aren't listed here, which really helps us understand and be able to bring full stack solutions from both the product and project side through development. Alrighty, so 2020. There's a lot of explicitives that people want to describe 2020 with, and I completely understand those. It's been a very, very hard year. It's been a lot of transitions. It's just things that we never thought were going to happen happened. And what we've seen is people were not prepared. Digital transformation, it's everything people talk about in the industry, but it's nothing that anyone can actually formulate what that means. And so it's very buzzwordy. It's very, like we have a digital transformation plan, but there's never actually a lot of tactical items or even strategic items behind what that means. Does that mean that you're going to re-platform? Does that mean that you're going to actually create a digital, space for your company? It's really up in the air. And that's what 2020 has really, it's really identified companies that haven't done that. And we've seen some great things come from 2020. You've seen local restaurants and stuff be able to spin up a web presence overnight. And that shows innovation. It shows a lot of the things that digital transformation was intended to be and just never could become. Large organizations, it's meant some other things, and we'll dive into some of those. So what we saw, like I said, for our clients, we've been lucky. We've had a lot of clients that have been able to grow, but on the flip side of that, we've had some of the clients that we have in hospitality completely, lose their businesses, or they've had to adjust. They've had to become a digital platform and potentially facilitate other things outside of just what they did before. People aren't traveling. You don't need necessarily a hotel room if you're not traveling. So what can companies do to help increase, awareness of their brand, and what can their brand do to stay relevant during a time like 2020 when their main revenue generators are no longer available? So one of the key things that I think everybody can relate to, and people that are here with me, especially I think that have children, have been able to relate to, is becoming remote. Like I said, I've worked remotely for about 6 years now. And one of the things with remote work is it's working from home and being remote first are not the same thing. Having a flex day of being at home, cooking some food, doing some laundry, that's not the reality of being a remote company. A remote company means that you have to figure out how to separate your personal space from your workspace when it's in one space. Add your spouse, potentially, your children, and all of the other things that came from COVID. And all of a sudden you have a lot of chaos. You might not even have the bandwidth to have 3 people on Zoom at the same time. For companies, though, I think companies realized very quickly that this can't be a blocker for them moving forward. Some local companies that I had exposure to, their team wasn't even on laptops. And so you would see on Facebook and stuff, people packing up their desktop computers to take them home because it was the only option they had because the state shut down the offices. That kind of stuff, it's just not going to be a reality to be able to move forward. While we all hope, vaccines and stuff are going to get us through COVID, we don't know. We don't know if this could be another year of working like this. And so having to adapt to a remote culture, and ideally a remote first culture, quickly became apparent. One of the key things for us at Modus of being a remote first culture is what that means is you have to have an environment that suits everybody. It has to suit first and foremost the people that can't be in a room. And with that, if you can get a process in place that really allows people that aren't in the room to feel like they're in the room, it's very easy to then be cohesive and allow the people that are in the room and outside of the room to feel like one. The thing where it's very difficult with this is it creates or requires a different level of management thinking. You can't have a lot of the micromanagement, a lot of the, I need to be able to see Joe to know Joe's working mentality. You have to be a results-oriented organization. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I understand there's jobs, especially like the essential workers, that aren't going to be remote, but I'm talking more software specifically, where, you had to figure out how this is going to work. One of the key things that we have found is hiring for remote is very important. Not everybody is a good remote employee. Not everybody has to be a good remote employee, but people need to understand the key priorities and the key reasons of what makes a team be able to collaborate and be efficient remotely, and that's communication. And so, using tools like Zoom, like Teams, whatever, and understanding the impact of words, on a screen, words over video, seeing people's faces, and driving those as priorities for your company, all of a sudden became extremely important overnight. In addition to that, using, like I said, the tool suite, having tools that help facilitate that is key. I've worked remotely for a long time, but for me still, nothing beats being in a room with a whiteboard when you want a solution. And so having to come up with different ways of doing that has been very challenging for a lot of our clients, a lot of, friends and family. And I think people are now understanding, you can do all of this remotely, but it has to be the first thought, not the last thought. You have to have a plan. And so creating that plan and, really understanding how you hire, how you staff, the tools you use, and how you manage becomes important. Remote should not, be, I guess, forgotten, because it's going to have to change how you manage. Changing your management style is key to be successful, and remote work's not going away. Your organization may choose to go back into an office, but remote's here to stay. And now that people have exposure to being able to work remotely, I think it's going to drive demand on the employee side of more people wanting to be remote. And in addition, we're seeing a lot of large companies like Google, Facebook, Atlassian either go with the, hey, we're going to be remote for at least the next year, or we're going to be remote indefinitely. That's going to create a tough job market for companies that are wanting to keep just local folks employed. You're now competing with the world, and you're competing with the big names in software. And then in addition, just, the chart I have here, you can see over the last decade and a half, remote work has trended up. As people understand that you don't need to be driving in your car every day. You don't need to take your time away from your family necessarily if you can find a company that supports remote and you're able to do it from your house and you have the right setup. And so, like I said, it's not going away. It's figuring out how your organization can adapt. And luckily, coming out of COVID, you don't have to adapt immediately. You can have a structured approach to how it will work for your company, but keeping that, in the front and part of your operational plan, I think is very, very important. And here's just, a little bit of statistics based on that. Like I said, it can be a very tough transition for people. It's not easy. And especially a lot of companies that have always been in an office. I work or live in the capital of Missouri, and a lot of my friends and, coworkers or former coworkers all work for the state. They've never done anything remotely. They are always been in the office. They have that camaraderie of having lunch together. And that's just, it's still important to have those team bonding sessions and all of that, but like, it's different now. Let's see, next slide. So digital disruption. This Chinese symbol here, for a long time in the Chinese alphabet, this was basically like chaos and demand and, creates disruption and something along those lines. I can't remember the exact words. And a lot of very, successful Americans, Kennedy, stuff like that, have repeated this. And while it was never really true, disruption, it does drive innovation. And while the symbol doesn't necessarily, it was never actually accurate, the stance is true. When we are forced to adapt, we do. And if you look at, 2008 as just one example of how disruption and crisis brought about opportunities, that's really when you saw another huge surge of applications and disruptors enter the market. And, a lot of these companies like WhatsApp, obviously they've been acquired by Facebook since, but communication, like people wanted to communicate. People didn't want to have to pay long distance to call people. People wanted to understand how they can talk to their friend across the world and how they can do it without having large costs involved. Welcome WhatsApp. Venmo, same thing. Why do I need to go to a bank or go to a store and get a money order? Why do I need to do all of this when everything's at my fingertips? There has to be a better way. And, you had Venmo come in, Slack, for any, the companies that are using Slack that are on the call today. Slack, in my opinion, revolutionized workspace communication. It really was forward thinking. And now you see a lot of its competitors coming and trying to replicate the features. And for the people that are huge Slack fans like myself, it's just, they've done something so well and just really, really did a good job of listening to what users want and figuring out what wasn't there in the larger enterprise solutions and honing in on those features. Did it have everything else did? No, but they picked the things that weren't done well and they really focused on those. And then, Groupon, same thing. And then Uber, obviously Uber is kind of that example in software right now of, it's become a verb, like, let's Uberize this or whatever. They came into a market that was not willing to listen to customer demands, not willing to listen to what customers wanted from a customer experience perspective. And they were able to take that and completely flip that world upside down, and put it at your fingertips. It became a customer-driven business, not driven by the taxi companies that didn't want to change how they were doing things. And I think, and then you look at others that have entered since, like Airbnb and stuff like that, where those are the kind of solutions that people want. And like, I love people, but it's so easy to grab my phone and do all of this and not have to pick up my phone and call people, use a phone book, go do all of that. It's all at your fingertips via an app. Some of the things that I think, those are more of the consumer facing things that I personally enjoy outside of Slack, but some of the things I think that COVID will help drive home, like I said previously, though, with a remote team, is really understanding how to create that office space and that office environment with no office. While Slack is a great starting point, Atlassian, a lot of the tools we already have help. I think the next, just making projections out for the next few years, I think there's going to be some tools that will enter the market that really, really hone in on creating that holistic environment where everyone feels they're all doing the same thing, and replaces some of that water cooler that's very hard to get without actually seeing people. It's never gonna fully replace the need for people interactions, for teams, for any of that. But I think we have a lot of opportunity in that space to continue to grow, to really get to a spot where it's a lot more holistic. Like I said, it's a lot more collaborative, and people are a lot more comfortable with it. I think one of the other things that will really help drive this is the people that are joining the workforce. Their background is all in digital. They're used to this. They're used to, much to my dismay, a lot of days, like my kids don't know how to have a phone conversation because they've never really had to do it. It's always been text. It's always been, typing out messages or being on a Zoom call. And so I think that this next generation, they're going to demand it. And what we've seen, like from millennials, they will come up with the solutions. And if we aren't, or, the group of people of other generations aren't creating them, they're going to be created. And then we're all going to have to adapt, just like we've had to do in the past. And so being able to capitalize and really help figure out what is missing and helping drive that is going to be, I think, a huge, huge thing for the next 5 years. And I think there's a lot of space open to really perfect that. So, every company is a software company. It's one of the most cliche things that, we tell people, that people tell us, and I don't mean that just in a work perspective, I mean it across the board. Everything is driven by software now. Everything that you need. I mean, there's very few businesses that can be ran without some sort of software, without some sort of interaction with software. And the thing with it being software is you have to focus on how you're going to be able to use the software to benefit you and your company and not let it hinder you. Of the companies that I mentioned that were great disruptors and stuff, some of the things that they did so well is they found a small problem to solve and they solved it. And they did so through very, very good customer experience, through, I like to say, through doing things good enough. And like, we don't need perfection on a lot of this stuff. As a company moves from, very old school ways of thinking into becoming and understanding they're a software company, you don't need perfection. You need good enough, but good enough can't be misconstrued for hacks and just hacks across the board. Right now is not the time to enter a market by hacking stuff together. There's a lot of risk in doing that. Good enough needs to mean good enough. There needs to be a sign off on exactly what good enough is from across user experience and understanding, to where you don't want to alienate current customers or hurt their user experience from the perspective of delivering software. It doesn't have to be bug free, but if you have key bugs that are going to stop you from allowing your customers to be able to do the 1 or 2 interactions that they are needing to do in your application, there's a huge risk there. Most people are not in the situation where they have no competition. Competition is, it's everywhere. And people have many options at their fingertips now to go find replacements to your software. Not in a threatening way, but it makes you realize that good enough has to be good enough. It's not the negative side of like, just do whatever that's good enough. It's we have to do what's good enough to move forward. Good or great can't be the enemy of good here. You can do good enough, but you have to really evaluate what good enough means. And I think the largest area of good enough and ensuring that really, when this becomes extremely important, is security. Most people in 2020, and I should probably check my slides, I may be talking over. Most people in 2020, I'll go back, sorry, here, have hit the issue of security, or they're familiar with a company that has. And I think the key thing for me in 2020, and we're seeing this really blow up, was Zoom. Zoom tried to do the right thing. Zoom said, you know what, we've got a great platform. Let's release it. Let's allow everybody to use our platform at discounted rates, at free. Let's push it to educational companies, blah, blah, blah. And what did that do? It created a ton of users that weren't able to scale quickly. But they were able to, they went back and they figured out how to get it good enough to be able to allow people to use the platform. But what that also did is it created a space for people that want to take advantage of people when they're vulnerable to do just that and start stealing personal data, etc. Zoom reacted very, very well, in my opinion, to getting something fixed, focusing heavily on security and moving forward. With that, you hope the brand wasn't damaged in the process, or not damaged to a point where it's going to affect their market share, etc. But you did see other companies capitalize a bit on it and focus heavily. You've seen Microsoft and some of the other companies with some of their ads focus heavily on, hey, security breaches are a problem, blah, blah, blah. And really elaborating on that. And that's the risk that happens with security. Zoom was able to recover. Every other company is not going to be able to recover like that. Everybody doesn't have capital backing like Zoom does. There's just a lot of risk in not doing security right. And, however many years ago, the Target breach, we all probably still remember that. So on the security side, good enough really, really, really has to be good enough. A bad user experience can probably be somewhat forgiven. You losing somebody's personal data or their identity being stolen is not going to be forgiven easily. And it can take a company from being highly profitable to, not being in business. And that's a huge, huge risk right now. And it's a huge opportunity for people that are looking at companies of where they can dive in and start figuring out how to manipulate and take advantage of such flaws. The thing with security that is good is, as things move to the cloud, it's easy to come up with solutions that are replicatable, that are easy to implement, and that can really help with this. But it now has to be a forward thought. This isn't something, with the whole digital transformation thing as well. This isn't something that should be on your roadmap for 2 years from now, because 2 years from now could be too late. Whether you're in banking, hospitality, anything, security matters. It's super important. As much as it is a buzzword right now, it matters. And the buzzword is because if you aren't there and you aren't ready for this, it's going to be detrimental. And we've seen, we've come in prior to things being an issue and helped clients, but we've also seen it on the flip side where the cleanup is much more expensive and it's much harder to get back. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube sort of scenario here. So you have to be ready for that. Just some data here and some facts. Much as I said, we're seeing a huge push in security and DevOps. DevOps, obviously, over the last decade has grown tremendously. Within Modus alone, it's been our fastest growing department over the past 2 years, growing by about 200%. People need automation. They want to be able to deploy their code easily. They want to be able to deploy their code fast, and they want their code tested and through all automation. And they want it all done, and spun up on using Google or AWS or Microsoft or whatever. With that, though, like I said, comes the security side of it. So we're seeing a big push in DevSecOps and a huge focus on security, both on the application side and the cloud side, and coming at every problem, thinking about that first, and then building your implementation or your solution around that. This is going to be within the IT sector. DevSecOps is going to be the fastest growing area within technology implementation. As that says, Gartner's predicting $170 billion to be spent by 2022 on security. And the thing with security is, while you used to just be able to do the quick and dirty, now there's so many dependencies on services that, like, your application may not be where the breach was, but ensuring that your application and the services and APIs your application uses are up to snuff with security is just as important, because people aren't going to remember which pay service you use. They're going to remember that the breach happened by using your application, and it filters down. So it becomes important as you build out your software to ensure that the companies and partners that you work with have security in mind, and that's a top priority of them. And they understand the impacts that it could have, on the downward effect of their clients and their customers as well. So one of the other key things that we've seen in 2020, and I'm sure that, many people on the call have also experienced, is de-risking, risking from, like, the things that we've talked about on, you have to understand how to do remote. That's a huge importance right now, but also on how you build and how you look at security. But lastly, de-risking just from a cost perspective. We've seen, I've personally had more interactions with procurement departments this year than ever before. And the interactions with procurement departments, they're not uncommon necessarily, but right now, the amount of focus from procurement is huge. And it's focused on, engagements that are very, small, well, relatively small, and in Modus's perspective, to large engagements. And people want to understand the money that they're spending and what they're getting for the money. The first few months from, March to June, there was a lot of freeze. People were not wanting to spend money at all. As summer came and people started realizing that, they're going to have some revenue, or the only way that they're going to get through COVID is making some of these investments in security and product and, user experience, to be able to, on the flip side of COVID, have a product ready to go that meets the market needs, or during COVID. They really had to figure out what they can spend and why. And so coming into Q3, I think people started realizing in Q4, okay, we survived COVID, but what does that mean? We can start spending money, but we need to manage what we're spending. We're not throwing money around necessarily like we were able to do a year ago, 2 years ago. So what we've seen a huge impact, or a huge push in forward moving for most of our clients and new clients that are coming in, is people want small, fixed priced and fixed outcome work. Now, while I can't highly recommend that, you go to a company and say, hey, I want to build a mobile app, or I want to build a web app, and how much is it going to cost for a year of work? There's way too much risk in that. There's way too many unknowns with software. But what we can do, and what we've seen, and we think that, clients are really adapting to, is doing some smaller engagements up front that help you understand what that build is going to entail. And so having small engagements that focus on product road mapping and understanding what that roadmap needs to be. And, it can be very high level, or even down to the user story level, and then deciding if you're going to build that internally or externally. By doing the road mapping, it allows you to create your plan to where you can then go put prices around that. Whether you're, outsourcing, like I said, or doing everything in-house, you can start planning out, okay, by Q1 of 2021, we should be able to have X, and here's the cost. If you do that upfront session and spend a month or 2 months or whatever, really looking at what that is. Outside of, more on the user experience and product side, you have the user research side, and understanding how COVID may have changed your user base is important, and doing a little, spending a little bit of money up front on identifying if potentially there's another service or product that you can push out to the market, and de-risking that by spending a month of doing upfront research before building. One of the hard things, and coming from a product background, one of the hardest things when you're in a product role is remembering that because the idea is yours, or because the idea is within your company and you think it's good, that's not necessarily what the market wants to buy. And 2020 and COVID are really driving that force. People are doing things that they never thought, or companies are seeing customers do things that they didn't think would be the actual outcome. And so really honing in on what else could we be offering, and let's spend a month researching what that looks like, to be able to build something that could potentially be a new revenue stream altogether, could support existing revenue streams, or allow you to diversify in other ways and reach out to other customers that you already have, or where you could expand, is key. A third thing that we're seeing a lot of is a lot of great technologies and frameworks that were very relevant 5 years ago are at a point where you need to make a decision of, we're going to upgrade from that framework, or that framework's older version that's no longer supported, to a new version, or is it time to make the switch to a new platform or a new framework? And that is another great way. If you do an assessment and really dive into what you currently have and what your future state needs to be, and you can start planning that out. You can start looking at your staffing plan. If you've always been a Java shop or PHP, and you're really moving toward a JavaScript, world, then, you can start planning out what your staffing plan needs to look like, how you would plan that along with your revenue, your expenses, all of that, and being able to de-risk a bit from doing a little upfront planning. In addition to that, on the modernization side, and with hiring, we're seeing that it's hard. some of the older technologies are hard to hire for, and especially in a remote world. Salaries become higher on some of the older tech. Some of the newer stuff is just more attractive to people coming out of college and to people that have been around. JavaScript is a fine example of that. We see more people wanting to move over to JavaScript, and then modern languages and frameworks like Ionic, Vue, React, Angular. People aren't wanting to do the old stuff anymore, and that becomes a risk for you when you're hiring. It also becomes a risk when you want to re-platform or you want to modernize, and you have to be thinking forward from that perspective and figuring out if it makes sense now to move that over, to decouple, your back end and front end from a deployment perspective. All of that is becoming hugely important. And by taking a month or two to create your plan again of what that will look like in 21 and what your company and leadership can expect to see and the outcomes that will come from the build have been a huge win for a lot of our clients and our customers, and helped resonate within their organizations, and they've been able to get great buy-in. In addition, and I know I spoke a little bit already to security, but one of the things that we've seen in our largest area that's of growth in any sort of assessment and pre-work in 2020 has been, doing a security assessment and really diving into looking at your cloud infrastructure, your application infrastructure, and saying, are there things here that we have that put us in immediate risk of vulnerabilities, whether it be internal applications that are storing employee data or external applications. And for companies, that are global, and I mean many U.S. companies also that have customers and clientele that are global, GDPR has recreated how a lot of companies have had to do work. And being able to focus and understand the risks of not being, whether it be GDPR compliant and some of the other compliances that are out there, compliances, it's becoming important. But then also looking at, a lot of people were able to move over to AWS or to GCP and do it quickly internally with the good enough approach, and didn't realize along the way by having their software engineers become DevOps engineers, the risk that could have potentially added. And then when you keep multiplying that year over year, you've just multiplied your risk tenfold. So we're seeing a lot of clients, they think they have an issue, potentially they want us to come in as outside eyes and do more of an audit and help them understand where their risks are at, if they have risks. And one of the other things is just the cost savings potential that they could have. As you keep adding users and not decommissioning users or, spinning up new instances, a lot of times, the last guy started it, the new gal came in, and there's never been the big cohesive look at the environments. And so by really stepping back, spending 2 weeks to 4 weeks to looking at your infrastructure and identifying, hey, like here's gaps, here's opportunities, here's risks, it becomes key. And as I said, by doing something like an assessment, whether, you have an outside company, shameless plug, come in and help you do an assessment, or you do it internally and you create a template and come up with everything that needs to be identified and then what needs to come out of it, it's going to help you in the long run be able to make sure that, you can be confident that you're not at risk. In addition to just focusing on security as a whole and the remediations, it's allowing people that have industry experience within your own industry, and then just within, people that are more experts at a given cloud implementation, et cetera, to be able to give you other ideas on best practices as well. And so, I think there's value. I think there's value in your team, and then a team that you have bring in and help you working together. No one knows your environment better than you. No one knows your company better than you. And so while, I like to partner with clients, there's a difference in partnering and somebody's taking over. And I think that partnership is where there's a lot of value in helping identify risk for you and identifying opportunities, and then identifying ways to be able to ensure that 2021 is productive for your organization. So I spoke a little bit to this, super boutiques and using management consulting is going to continue to grow per, all of the studies that are out there. Allowing your team to focus on the things that they need to build from the product side and what they are passionate about is key. And also not allowing people to do things that are not in the best interest for your organization or for the person. And, I've seen it across multiple clients where because somebody wants to do DevOps or wants to understand cloud, that's totally fine, but it's probably not the right time to let them architect a cloud solution for you. Have them working with experts that understand cloud architecture, etc. And then, allow them to learn on the job like that, and then roll into a role of support versus, using Google or Stack Overflow to come up with your solution. It's not a good measure. And I could speak for another hour on the risk that brings companies that we've seen firsthand in the cleanup associated. So what can you do? First and foremost, people need to understand that 2020 was probably, the weirdest year for most of us on the planet. But moving forward, 2020 was really an eye-opening experience to what the next digital revolution is going to be. And it's going to be focused on, like I said, it's going to be a remote first work environment. It's going to be focused heavily on security. It's going to be focused on having things at your customers' fingertips as often as possible, because if you're not the one that's at their fingertips, somebody else will come in and will be at their fingertips. And really understanding technology as a whole and how your technology partners work together, your technology platforms work together, and ensuring that there's no risk in doing that. In addition to, to all of this, as it says here, like, work close with your customers, understand your customers' demands and what they need and their wants, and understand how, by focusing on everything else, build what your customers want. By building what they want and doing it in a way where your team's happy as well, everyone at the end is going to be a winner on it. And that's really the goal of everybody here. Happy customers usually lead to happy management, which usually leads to, revenue and bonuses and all of the things that everybody at the end cares about. That is everything I had. I apologize for my computer glitches at the beginning, but I appreciate Ionic. I thank you guys for letting me present. It was an honor. And any questions, feel free to shoot them over to Matt.